The radiator hissed. Steam curled into the frozen Belgian air, mixing with the cordite smell that never left this stretch of road. Private First Class Johnny Barnes gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles bone-white beneath layers of grime and cold. Behind him, Lieutenant Morrison barked coordinates into the radio, completely unaware that in less than 3 minutes, Barnes would disobey a direct order and change the course of an entire offensive. December 18th, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, 48 hours into what history would call the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and capture the port of Antwerp. The Führer had committed 29 divisions, over 400,000 men, to this audacious counteroffensive through terrain the Allies considered impassable for armor. He was proving them wrong. Barnes was 22 years old, a farm kid from Nebraska who'd never seen mountains before basic training, never held a rifle before the draft board called his number. The Army had trained him for exactly one job: drive the Jeep, keep the engine running, and get officers from point A to point B without getting them killed. That was it. No heroics, no initiative. Just drive. Before we go further, I need your help keeping this channel alive. Hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It takes 1 second, and it tells YouTube to show this content to more people who appreciate real history. Now, back to Belgium. The Jeep lurched over frozen ruts. The 2nd Battalion, 394th Infantry Regiment, had been holding this sector for 3 days. 3 days of non-stop German probing attacks, artillery barrages that shook teeth loose, and the constant fear that somewhere in those dark pines a panzer division was forming up for the kill. Intelligence had it wrong. They always had it wrong. Command thought this was a localized attack, a diversion. By the time they realized the entire German 6th Panzer Army was bearing down on them, it would be too late for thousands of men. Barnes's orders were simple: drive Lieutenant Morrison to the forward observation post, wait while he coordinated artillery support, then drive him back. 30-minute round trip, maximum exposure, minimum engagement. The kind of mission that got you through the day so you could huddle in a foxhole at night and dream about Kansas wheat fields or Brooklyn stoops or anywhere that wasn't this frozen hell. The road curved through a dense stand of firs. Morrison was still on the radio, his breath visible in short, frustrated bursts. "Say again, Baker Company. Your transmission is breaking up. I need exact—" The explosion came from their left. Not artillery, too sharp, too focused. An 80mm anti-tank gun, the German gunner's aim off by maybe 10 feet. The shell impacted a tree trunk, sending splinters the size of daggers through the air. One caught Morrison in the shoulder. He went down hard, the radio handset clattering against the dashboard. Barnes didn't think. Thinking got you killed. He jerked the wheel right, accelerated. The Jeep's engine screamed in protest. Behind them, another 88 round chewed through the spot they'd occupied 2 seconds earlier. Barnes could see it now, the gun position, partially concealed by fallen timber and camouflage netting. Smart placement, covering the entire approach to the American lines. Any reinforcements trying to reach the forward positions would have to run this gauntlet. Morrison was conscious, but bleeding a lot. Arterial blood dark and pulsing, Barnes had seen enough wounded men to know the lieutenant had minutes, not hours. He needed a medic. He needed to get back to friendly lines. The Jeep skidded to a stop behind a bombed-out farmhouse, its walls pocked with shrapnel scars. Barnes applied pressure to Morrison's shoulder with one hand, while his brain ran calculations. 300 yards back to the aid station. Maybe 4 minutes if he pushed the Jeep hard. Morrison would live, the mission would abort, and that 80mm gun would keep killing every American who tried to move up this road. He looked at the lieutenant. Morrison's eyes were unfocused, shock setting in. "Go," the officer whispered. "Get back. That's an order." Barnes had grown up on a farm where initiative was survival, where waiting for someone to tell you to fix the broken fence meant dead cattle and a failed harvest. The Army had tried to train that instinct out of him, tried to make him a cog in a machine where orders flowed downhill and you never, ever questioned the chain of command. He'd been an obedient soldier for 9 months. He'd driven when told to drive, stopped when told to stop, and kept his mouth shut when officers made decisions that got good men killed. But the Jeep was his vehicle. He'd rebuilt the carburetor twice, replaced the fan belt with a section of parachute cord, and nursed this temperamental piece of Detroit steel through mud, snow, and enemy fire. In some fundamental way that had nothing to do with Army regulations, this Jeep belonged to him. And right now, he saw what needed to be done. Barnes grabbed Morrison's Thompson submachine gun from where it had fallen. 30-round magazine, probably 25 left after the lieutenant's last engagement. He checked the chamber, loaded. The lieutenant also carried 4 grenades on his belt. Barnes took them all. Morrison tried to protest, but the words came out slurred, meaningless. "I'll be back," Barnes said. He didn't know if that was true. The 80-millimeter gun sat in a natural depression, earth bermed up on 3 sides. Textbook, German defensive emplacement, 5-man crew, commander, gunner, 2 loaders, and a spotter with a radio. They'd positioned it to cover maximum frontage while maintaining concealment from American artillery observers. Smart, disciplined, deadly. But Barnes had spent childhood summers hunting white-tailed deer in terrain, not that different from this. And the first rule of hunting was simple. Never approach from where your target expects you. He left the Jeep running. If this went wrong, if he got cut down in the next 60 seconds, at least the engine noise might cover Morrison's location. Give him a chance. Barnes moved low, using the terrain. The forest floor was frozen solid, no risk of crunching leaves or snapping twigs. Just the distant rumble of artillery from the main battle line and the occasional crack of small arms fire, 50 yards, 40. He could hear them now, speaking German in low, confident tones. They thought they owned this piece of ground. 3 American vehicles destroyed in the last hour, 14 confirmed kills. The spotter was calling in coordinates for the next likely target. They were methodical, professional, veterans of the Eastern Front, probably. Men who'd learned their craft-killing T-34s in the steppes of Russia and now applied that expertise to American Shermans and Jeeps. Barnes crouched behind a fallen log, maybe 20 yards from the gun position. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every tactical manual, every training film, every lecture from grizzled sergeants said the same thing. Call it in. Let artillery handle it. Don't be a hero. Heroes got themselves killed and accomplished nothing. But there was no time for artillery, no time for proper coordination, just a Nebraska farm kid with a borrowed Thompson and a sense that if he didn't act right now, this gun would keep killing Americans all day long. The first grenade was luck, pure dumb luck. He pulled the pin, counted 2 seconds, just like they drilled into him at Fort Benning, and lobbed it overhand. It arced through the air, trailing its fuse smoke, and dropped perfectly into the gun pit. The German crew had maybe 1 second to register what was happening. Not enough time to dive clear, not enough time to do anything except die. The explosion was muffled by the earthen walls of the emplacement, a dull crump that sent smoke and debris fountaining upward. Barnes didn't wait to assess damage. He was already moving, Thompson up and ready. The training took over. Controlled bursts. Don't empty the magazine. Aim for center mass. One of the German loaders had been blown clear of the pit. He was on the ground, disoriented, reaching for a Mauser rifle. Barnes put 3 rounds into him. The man jerked and went still. The gun pit was carnage. 2 men dead from the grenade, shrapnel having done its ugly work. The commander was alive but badly wounded, trying to crawl toward a Schmeisser MP-40 submachine gun. Barnes kicked it away, then froze. The spotter was gone, not dead in the pit, not visible anywhere nearby, Just gone. Training said secure the position, account for all hostiles, never assume. But instinct, that farm kid instinct that had kept him alive this long, was screaming at him. The spotter hadn't been killed, which meant he was running to alert the German positions further up the line that their 88 was compromised, running to bring reinforcements. Barnes sprinted after him. Through the trees, glimpses of field gray uniform. The German was young, maybe 19, and he was fast, scared fast, the kind of speed that comes from knowing that survival depends on reaching friendly lines before the American behind you puts a bullet in your back. They crashed through undergrowth. Barnes's lungs burned. The Thompson weighed a ton. He was losing ground. The German broke into a small clearing, and Barnes knew with absolute certainty, that on the other side of that clearing was a German machine gun nest or a mortar team or a company of infantry. Once the spotter reached them, Barnes was dead. He stopped running, dropped to one knee, brought the Thompson up, sighted, and squeezed the trigger. The weapon bucked against his shoulder. A short burst. The German went down hard, tumbling forward. Barnes didn't know if he'd hit him or if the man had tripped. Didn't matter. He was up and running again, closing the distance. The German was hit. Leg wound, blood soaking through his trousers. But he was still crawling toward the tree line, still trying to complete his mission. Barnes grabbed him by the collar, yanked him backward. The young soldier's face was pale, contorted with pain and fear. He was saying something in German, probably begging for his life. Barnes didn't speak German, didn't need to. He pressed the Thompson's barrel against the man's chest and shook his head once. The message was clear: shut up and stay down. That's when he heard them, voices, German voices, multiple speakers coming from the direction the spotter had been running toward. Barnes's stomach dropped. He'd chased the German right into an enemy position, which meant he was now between two German units with a wounded prisoner, a nearly empty submachine gun, and no backup. The smart play was to retreat. Leave the prisoner, get back to the jeep, get Morrison to safety, and call in proper support. That was what the field manual said. That was what any rational soldier would do. Barnes looked at the German fortifications he could now see through the trees, not just a single position, a whole network, bunkers, interconnected trenches, a strong point that probably anchored the entire German defensive line in this sector, and none of it on American maps, because intelligence had dismissed this area as lightly held. If this position stayed intact, the German counteroffensive would roll right through here. Companies would be cut off, supply lines interdicted. Men would die because nobody knew this fortress existed. He heard movement behind him, spun, Thompson ready. But it wasn't Germans. It was Americans. 3 of them emerging from concealment with M1 Garands leveled. Infantry from the 394th, separated from their unit during the German assault, trying to find their way back to friendly lines. The staff sergeant in charge, name tape read Holland, took in the scene with quick, professional assessment. Captured German blood trail, Barnes's corporal insignia. "The hell are you doing here, driver?" Holland's voice was flat, completely neutral. Could go either way. Barnes pointed toward the German positions. "There's a bunker complex, maybe 20 yards that way. Looks like it goes deep. I counted at least 3 firing positions, probably more." Holland studied him. "You're supposed to be driving a jeep, Corporal." "Yes, Sergeant." "Where's your officer?" "Wounded, back at the farmhouse. Needs immediate evac." "So you decided to go sightseeing instead?" "I decided to stop an 88 from killing more Americans, Sergeant. The bunker was extra." One of the other soldiers, Private Kowalski, baby-faced and terrified, spoke up. "Sarge, we can't assault a fortified position. We're separated from the company. No support. No." "I know what we don't have, Kowalski." Holland kept his eyes on Barnes. "What we do have is a corporal who apparently can't follow simple orders. You're a driver, not infantry, not a scout." "A driver." "Yes, Sergeant." And yet, here we are. The German artillery chose that moment to resume its bombardment. Shells walked through the forest, each explosion sending trees toppling. The ground shook. Bark and frozen earth rained down. They all dropped flat, hands over helmets, bodies pressed into any depression that might provide a cover. When the barrage lifted, Holland's face was different, harder. He'd made a decision. If that bunker complex stays active, none of us make it back. Division doesn't know it's here, which means they're going to send trucks right through this kill zone. He looked at Barnes. You started this. You finish it. What do you need? What Barnes needed was an entire infantry platoon, artillery support, maybe a tank or two. What he had was 3 separated infantrymen, a wounded German prisoner, and his own stubborn refusal to quit. The bunker has multiple firing ports, Barnes said, thinking out loud. But they're designed for long-range engagement. They're not expecting close assault from this angle. Because nobody's stupid enough to close assault a fortified bunker with 4 men, Kowalski said. 5, Barnes corrected. He looked at the German prisoner. The young soldier's eyes were wide, tracking the conversation even though he probably didn't understand the words, but he understood the situation. Barnes pointed at the prisoner, then at the bunker, then made a walking motion with his fingers. Holland caught on immediately. You want to use him as a shield? I want him to walk up to that bunker like he's wounded and needs help, which he is. They'll open the door, or at least expose themselves to check on him. That's our window. That's a war crime, Corporal, using prisoners as he walks up on his own. We don't force him. We don't threaten him. We just give him the option of walking toward his own people. Barnes met Holland's stare. If they shoot him thinking he's a threat, that's on them. If he warns them we're coming, we'll be ready. Either way, we get a reaction. It was a thin rationalization, and everyone knew it. But they were behind enemy lines with German armor rolling through the forest and no good options. Survival didn't come from playing by peacetime rules. The German understood enough to know his life was currency. Barnes helped him up, bandaged the leg wound with a torn strip from his own undershirt, and indicated the direction. The prisoner nodded. His face showed resignation, not fear. He was a soldier. He understood the game. They let him limp forward, clearly visible, calling out in German. Barnes and the others moved in his wake, using the natural terrain, keeping the prisoner between themselves and the bunker. It was ugly work. The kind of thing that wouldn't make it into any official report, because it existed in the moral gray space where survival intersected with ethics. The bunker door opened. A German soldier emerged, rifle slung, clearly responding to what he thought was a wounded comrade. That was all the window they needed. Holland moved first. 20 years in the army had made him fast, despite his bulk. He crossed the distance in 4 seconds, rifle butt catching the German soldier in the jaw before the man could process the threat. Barnes was right behind him, Thompson up, firing a burst through the open doorway. The round sparked off concrete and steel, ricocheting through the confined interior space, screaming German voices, panicked and angry. Return fire from inside the bunker, MP-40s, the distinctive sound of German submachine guns in close quarters. Kowalski took a round in the shoulder, spun, and went down. The other American soldier, PFC Martinez, threw a grenade through the door, and they all pressed themselves against the bunker's exterior walls as the explosion rocked the structure. Smoke poured from the entrance. Barnes reloaded the Thompson with his last magazine. 17 rounds left. Maybe. He hadn't been counting carefully, and now it mattered. Holland had his rifle up, sighted on the doorway, waiting for targets. Someone inside was shouting orders in German. The language of command was universal. Some officer trying to restore order, trying to organize a defense. Barnes made a decision. He charged through the door. The military calls it aggressive entry. The reality is controlled insanity. You move fast, shoot anything that moves, and hope your momentum carries you through before the enemy can organize. The bunker interior was smoke and chaos. Bodies on the ground from the grenade, wounded men trying to bring weapons to bear. Barnes fired the Thompson in short, controlled bursts, the muscle memory of 1,000 training repetitions taking over where conscious thought failed. He cleared the first room. A German soldier rose from behind an overturned table, MP-40 coming up. Barnes was faster. 3-round center mass. The German went down. Second room, smaller, filled with radio equipment and maps. An officer, a Hauptmann captain equivalent, going for his holstered Luger. Barnes kicked his hand away, put the Thompson's barrel against the man's chest. "Don't," Barnes said in English. The word meant nothing to the German, but the intent was clear. The Hauptmann's hands went up. Holland came through the door behind him, Martinez right after. They swept the remaining spaces, finding 2 more Germans who immediately surrendered. The bunker was secure. 8 Germans dead, 5 captured, including the officer. More importantly, the position was neutralized. But Barnes wasn't thinking about the tactical victory. He was thinking about Lieutenant Morrison, still bleeding out in that farmhouse, thinking about how he'd disobeyed a direct order, thinking about whether he'd just ended his military career or earned a medal. Holland was already on the bunker's radio, trying to raise American forces. "Any station, this is Able 4-3. We've captured a German strongpoint. Coordinates—" He rattled off their position from the German maps spread across the table. Within 30 minutes, American units were flooding the area. Combat engineers to secure the bunker complex. Infantry to push forward now that the German defensive anchor was gone. Medics who loaded Morrison onto a stretcher and promised he'd make it if they moved fast. Within 3 hours, the 2nd Battalion had resumed its advance, using the captured German positions as a jumping-off point for counterattacks that would help stabilize the entire northern shoulder of the Bulge salient. And Barnes? Barnes sat in the back of an ambulance, hands shaking from adrenaline crash, while a major from Division Intelligence peppered him with questions. How had he identified the bunker complex? What were the German defensive arrangements? Could he identify the unit insignia on the prisoners? He answered mechanically, still not quite believing he was alive. The major finally paused, studying Barnes with an expression that might have been respect or might have been calculation. "You're a jeep driver, Corporal." "Yes, sir." "Jeep drivers are supposed to drive jeeps." "Yes, sir." "They're not supposed to single-handedly assault fortified enemy positions." "No, sir." The major closed his notebook. "I'm recommending you for the Silver Star. Maybe the Distinguished Service Cross if the colonel's feeling generous. You've got a future in the infantry, Barnes, if you want it." Barnes thought about Nebraska, about wheat fields where the only thing trying to kill you was the weather, about a life where orders made sense and you didn't have to decide between obeying and doing what was right. "I just want to drive my jeep, sir." But even as he said it, he knew things had changed. You don't go back to simple after you've led a charge against a bunker. You don't unlearn the feeling of taking initiative when every instinct says, "Wait for orders." Barnes had crossed a line that December day, and there was no crossing back. The Battle of the Bulge would rage for another month. By the time German forces finally collapsed, 19,000 American soldiers would be dead, 47,500 wounded. The 2nd Infantry Division alone would take nearly 5,000 casualties. But the northern shoulder held, largely because of positions like the one Barnes had captured, positions that weren't on any map, but that anchored the German defensive line. In the official after-action reports, the bunker complex capture rated 3 paragraphs. 4 men from separated units displaying initiative and tactical proficiency neutralized a fortified position that threatened American supply lines. Standard military prose, clinical and bloodless. What the reports didn't capture was the fundamental tension Barnes had resolved that day. The Army ran on orders, on hierarchical structure, on the idea that officers thought and enlisted men executed. But combat was chaos, and chaos demanded improvisation. The soldiers who survived weren't always the ones who followed orders most precisely. Sometimes they were the ones who knew when to ignore orders entirely. Barnes received the Distinguished Service Cross in a ceremony 3 months later. By then, he was driving a Jeep for a colonel in the occupation forces, shuttling between administrative offices in what had been Germany, and was now just rubble and defeat. The medal felt heavy, not with pride, but with the weight of 8 men he'd killed in that bunker. Men who'd been doing their jobs, following their orders, and who'd died because Barnes decided his judgment superseded the chain of command. He never talked about it after the war. Came back to Nebraska, took over the family farm, married a local girl who'd known him before the Army made him into something else. When veterans gathered at the VFW Hall and swapped stories, Barnes stayed quiet. Let them talk about the big battles, the famous names, the legendary units. Because Barnes's story wasn't about glory. It was about the moment when a 22-year-old kid decided that waiting for orders might be safe, but it wasn't right. About the split-second calculation that following procedure would get men killed, and breaking procedure might get them killed too. But at least you'd die having made the choice yourself. The Jeep he'd driven that day ended up in a motor pool somewhere, probably scrapped for parts or rusting in a depot. But the lesson it taught stayed with every soldier who heard the story. Sometimes the most important order is the one you give yourself. Sometimes heroism looks like disobedience, and sometimes the difference between a good soldier and a dead one is knowing which orders to follow and which to ignore. That bunker complex in the Ardennes Forest is gone now, filled in and forgotten, just another footnote in a war full of them. The German Hauptmann Barnes captured survived the war and became a teacher in Munich. 2 of the American soldiers who helped take the position, Holland and Martinez, were killed in subsequent fighting before Germany surrendered. Kowalski survived his shoulder wound and opened a hardware store in Cleveland. And Barnes? Barnes drove his Jeep right up until the war ended and they sent him home. He'd been ordered to just drive, to stay in his lane, to be a cog in the vast machine of modern warfare. Instead, he led a charge and captured a bunker, and in doing so, proved that sometimes the most important missions are the ones nobody orders you to undertake. They're the ones you choose in the moment when choice becomes survival, and survival becomes heroism. The fields of Belgium grow green now, covering the scars of that terrible winter. But the story persists because it speaks to something fundamental about warfare and about human nature. We build systems of orders and hierarchy because we believe they create efficiency and control. But combat strips away systems, leaving only individuals facing impossible choices. Barnes's choice, to act rather than wait, to risk rather than retreat, defined him more than any order ever could. In the end, that's what separates a driver from a soldier. A driver follows roads. A soldier creates them. Barnes was ordered to be the former. He chose to become the latter. And in that choice lies every reason why wars are won, not by the plans of generals, but by the decisions of corporals who see what needs doing and do it. Regulations be damned. The Jeep was just machinery. Barnes was the one who drove it toward the sound of guns when every instinct said to turn around. That's not in any manual. That's not something you can train. That's the difference between following orders and understanding the mission, between doing your job and doing what's necessary. They ordered him to just drive the Jeep. He led a charge and captured a bunker instead. And somewhere in that defiance of expectations lies the real story of courage.